Sarah Martinez sat in her wheelchair at the corner table of Murphy's bar, watching the crowd through tired eyes. The Friday night regulars filled the dimly lit space with loud laughter and clinking glasses. She adjusted her blanket over her legs, a habit she'd developed since the car accident 8 months ago that changed everything. At 28, Sarah had been a rising star in the corporate world. Marketing director at a Fortune 500 company, marathon runner, weekend rock climber. Then came that rainy Tuesday evening when a drunk driver ran a red light and crushed her dreams along with her spine. The doctors said she'd never walk again. Her boyfriend left 3 weeks later. Her company restructured her position away. Now she lived on disability payments in a cramped studio apartment, spending most evenings at Murphy's because the bar owner, old Tom Murphy, never made her feel like a burden. He'd installed a ramp just for her and always kept her favorite corner table clear. "Another coffee, sweetheart?" asked Jenny, the waitress who'd become something of a friend. "Please," Sarah nodded, her voice barely audible over the music. That's when the 4 men walked in. They moved with the swagger of guys who thought the world owed them something. The leader, a tall man with greasy black hair and prison tattoos crawling up his neck, scanned the room like a predator sizing up prey. His eyes stopped on Sarah. "Well, look what we got here," he said loudly, nudging his buddies. "Little broken bird all by herself." Sarah's stomach tightened. She'd learned to read trouble, and these men radiated it. She reached for her phone, but the tattooed man was already walking over. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said, leaning against her table. His breath reeked of whiskey and cigarettes. "You look lonely over here. Name's Rick. Why don't you let me and my boys keep you company?" "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Rick laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the bar's noise. "Fine? Honey, you're sitting here all alone, can't even walk to the bathroom by yourself. That don't look fine to me." The other patrons had started to notice the commotion. Some looked uncomfortable but turned away. Others watched with the morbid curiosity of people watching a car accident unfold. "Please leave me alone," Sarah said firmly. "Or what?" Rick's voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "You gonna run away?" His friends erupted in cruel laughter. One of them, a stocky man with a shaved head, moved to block Sarah's path to the door. Another positioned himself near the bar, ensuring no one would interfere. Tom Murphy looked up from behind the bar, his weathered face creased with concern. He was in his 70s, too old to take on 4 younger men, but Sarah could see him reaching for the phone to call for help. "Don't even think about it, old man," the 4th member of the group called out. He was thin and wiry, with nervous energy that suggested he was high on something. "This is just a friendly conversation." Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs. She'd faced challenges before: boardroom negotiations, difficult clients, physical therapy that left her sobbing from pain. But this was different. This was pure, predatory evil, and she was trapped. "Look, I don't want any trouble," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. Rick leaned closer, his hand suddenly on her shoulder. "No trouble at all, baby. Just think you could use some real men to take care of you. Show you what you've been missing, stuck in that chair." The hand tightened on her shoulder, fingers digging into her flesh. Sarah winced but didn't cry out. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "I have money in my purse," she said quietly. "Take it and leave me alone." "Money?" Rick's laugh was uglier now. "Sweetheart, we ain't here for your disability check. We got bigger plans for you." The words hit Sarah like ice water. This wasn't a robbery. These men had something far worse in mind. She looked around the bar desperately. Most of the other customers had quietly slipped out, not wanting to get involved. Tom Murphy still stood behind the bar, his face pale, phone in his shaking hand. A few regulars remained, a couple of college kids who looked terrified, an older woman who sat frozen in her booth. "Help me," Sarah called out, her voice carrying across the room. "Shut up," Rick snapped, his hand moving to cover her mouth. That's when she bit him. Rick jerked his hand back with a curse, blood welling from the bite marks on his palm. "You little," the backhand came fast and hard, snapping Sarah's head to the side. Stars exploded across her vision, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. "Should have been nice," Rick snarled. "Now we're gonna have to teach you some manners." The stocky man moved closer, pulling out a switchblade that clicked open with a metallic snap. "Want me to convince her, Rick?" "Not here," Rick said, glancing around at the few remaining witnesses. "We'll take her somewhere private." "Load her up in the van." "No," Sarah whispered, real terror freezing her blood. They were going to take her. 4 men against 1 woman in a wheelchair, and no one in this bar was going to stop them. She thought about screaming, but who would hear? Who would care enough to risk their own safety for a stranger? The thin man was already behind her wheelchair, hands on the handles. "Please," she tried one more time. "Please don't do this." "Too late for please," Rick said. He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Should have thought of that before you bit me, you little. Is there a problem here?" The voice was quiet, controlled, but it cut through the tension like a blade. Sarah looked up to see a man standing near their table. He was maybe 35, average height, wearing jeans and a plain gray t-shirt. Nothing remarkable about his appearance except for his eyes, pale blue and absolutely steady. "No problem, friend," Rick said, not releasing Sarah's chin. "Just having a conversation with our girl here." "Didn't look like conversation to me," the newcomer said mildly. "Looked like you were about to kidnap someone." Rick's friends shifted positions, the stocky one palming his knife, the thin one tightening his grip on Sarah's wheelchair. The 4th man, who'd been watching the door, turned to face this new threat. "You got a hearing problem?" Rick straightened up, trying to use his height advantage. "I said no problem here. Why don't you mind your own business and walk away?" The stranger didn't move. "Can't do that." "Can't?" Rick laughed, but there was less confidence in it now. "Friend, there's 4 of us and 1 of you. Math ain't in your favor." "Math's not everything," the man replied. Sarah studied his face, looking for some sign that he could actually help her against 4 criminals. He seemed calm, almost relaxed, but she didn't see anything that suggested he was a fighter. No obvious muscles, no tough guy attitude. Just a quiet man who'd walked into a bad situation. "Last chance," Rick said, his voice hardening. "Walk away, or we'll put you down." "I don't think so," the stranger said. That's when Sarah noticed his hands. They hung loose at his sides, but there was something about the way he held them, ready, balanced. And, despite his casual appearance, he stood with the kind of posture that spoke of serious training. Rick must have sensed it too, because his confident sneer faltered slightly. "Who are you?" he asked. "Name's David," the man replied. "David Chen. And you're about to make a very big mistake." The stocky man with the knife moved first, lunging forward with the blade leading. David sidestepped with fluid grace, his hand snapping out to grab the attacker's wrist. There was a sharp crack, a scream, and the knife clattered to the floor. The stocky man dropped to his knees, clutching his broken wrist. The thin man released Sarah's wheelchair and rushed David from behind. Without even turning around, David drove his elbow back into the attacker's solar plexus. The man doubled over, gasping, and David spun to deliver a precise strike to the base of his skull. He crumpled unconscious to the floor. The whole exchange had taken maybe 3 seconds. Rick and his remaining friend backed away, suddenly, looking a lot less confident. "You made a mistake, man," Rick said, pulling out his own knife. "You got lucky with those 2, but David moved like lightning. One moment he was standing still, the next he was inside Rick's guard, one hand controlling the knife arm while the other delivered a series of rapid strikes to Rick's ribs and neck. Rick's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in a boneless heap. The 4th man turned to run, but David was already there, catching him by the collar and spinning him around into a chokehold. 10 seconds later, he was unconscious on the floor with his 3 friends. The entire fight had taken less than 30 seconds. Sarah stared in shock as David calmly pulled out his cell phone and dialed. "This is David Chen," he said when someone answered. "I need local police at Murphy's Bar on 5th Street. 4 men attempted to assault a disabled woman. They're unconscious but breathing." He hung up and knelt beside Sarah's wheelchair. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Sarah touched her split lip, still not quite believing what she'd just witnessed. No. I mean, he hit me, but I'm okay." She looked at the 4 unconscious men scattered around her table. "Who are you?" David smiled for the first time, and it transformed his entire face. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." "You're military," she said. It wasn't a question. Was. "Navy. Did some time in the teams?" Sarah's eyes widened. Navy teams meant SEALs. That explained everything: the calm demeanor, the lightning-fast reactions, the surgical precision with which he'd dismantled 4 armed men. "I can't believe you just..." She gestured helplessly at the unconscious attackers. "Believe it," David said. "And those men aren't going to bother you or anyone else for a while." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "The police will want statements," David continued. "But don't worry about these guys. They've got long records, I'm guessing. This won't be their first time in handcuffs." Sarah nodded numbly. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her shaky and emotional. "Thank you," she whispered. "I thought they were going to." "They weren't going to do anything," David said firmly. "Because that's not going to happen. Not on my watch." The police arrived in a flurry of flashing lights and radio chatter. The 4 attackers were still unconscious when the paramedics checked them over before the officers loaded them into squad cars. Sarah gave her statement, describing the attempted assault and David's intervention. The lead detective, a grizzled man named Rodriguez, seemed to know David. "Chen," he said with a nod. "Should have known you'd be involved when dispatch said 4 guys got taken down by 1 man. They were about to kidnap her," David replied simply. Detective Rodriguez looked at the 4 suspects, then at David, then at Sarah. "These boys picked the wrong victim and the wrong bar," he said. "Chen here's got a habit of being in the right place at the right time." "It's not a habit," David protested. "I was just having a beer." "Sure you were," Rodriguez said with a knowing smile. After the police finished their work and the crowd dispersed, Sarah found herself alone with David at her corner table. Tom Murphy had insisted on buying them both dinner, though Sarah found she had little appetite. "How did you know?" she asked. "I mean, how did you know they were really going to hurt me?" David was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched hamburger. "Experience," he said finally. "You learn to read people, to see the signs. Those men had violence in their eyes. They weren't just drunk and stupid, they were predators. And you just happened to be here? I live a few blocks away. Come in here sometimes when I can't sleep." He looked up at her. "Which is most nights, to be honest." Something in his voice made Sarah study his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, a tightness in his jaw that suggested barely controlled tension. "Bad dreams?" she asked gently. David's smile was rueful. "Something like that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of what had happened settling over them. Sarah found herself looking at this quiet man who'd appeared out of nowhere to save her. There was more to his story, she was certain. Heroes didn't just materialize in dive bars by accident. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. What you did to those men, is that something you learned in the Navy?" David nodded slowly. "Part of it. We called it close-quarters combat. Useful when you need to neutralize threats quickly and quietly." "And the other part?" "Growing up in a rough neighborhood. Learning that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when the odds are against you." Sarah thought about that, about a young David Chen facing down bigger, meaner kids with nothing but courage and determination. It painted a picture of a man who'd spent his whole life protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. "Why did you help me?" she asked. You didn't know me. You could have walked away. David met her eyes directly. Because walking away when someone needs help isn't something I can do. It's not who I am. The simple honesty in his voice made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. When was the last time someone had stood up for her? When was the last time someone had seen her as worth protecting? I should get home, she said, suddenly, exhausted. I'll drive you, David said immediately. You don't have to. Yes, I do. His tone brooked no argument. Those men have friends, and word travels fast. Until they're processed and formally charged, I'm not leaving you alone. Sarah wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, but the memory of Rick's hands on her shoulders made her shudder. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. David helped her into his pickup truck, carefully folding her wheelchair and placing it in the bed. The drive to her apartment was short, filled with comfortable silence and the soft sound of late-night radio. This is it, Sarah said as they pulled up to her building. David looked at the rundown complex with its broken security lights and questionable neighborhood. How long have you lived here? Since the accident. It's what I can afford now. David said nothing, but Sarah caught the tightening around his eyes. He helped her out of the truck and insisted on walking her to her door, despite her protests that she was fine. Lock your deadbolt, he said as she opened her apartment. And keep your phone close tonight. You really think they'll try something else? Probably not. But probably isn't good enough when it comes to your safety. Sarah looked at this man who'd turned her worst night in months into something bearable. Will I see you again? David hesitated at the threshold. If you want to. I do, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. Then, you will, he promised. As she watched him drive away, Sarah realized something had changed tonight. Not just the fact that she'd been rescued from a terrible situation, but something deeper. For the first time since the accident, she'd felt like someone saw her as more than a victim. David hadn't looked at her with pity or discomfort. He'd seen someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for. She locked her deadbolt and settled into her bed, but sleep was a long time coming. Her mind kept replaying the evening's events, but now instead of focusing on the terror of those four men, she found herself thinking about David's steady blue eyes and the quiet strength in his voice when he'd said her attackers weren't going to do anything because it wasn't going to happen on his watch. For the first time in 8 months, Sarah Martinez fell asleep feeling safe. 3 days passed before Sarah saw David again. She'd returned to Murphy's bar on Monday evening, partly out of stubbornness and partly because she refused to let 4 criminals change her routine. The attack had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but hiding in her apartment felt like admitting defeat. Tom Murphy hovered over her more than usual, refilling her coffee cup every few minutes and asking if she needed anything. The other regulars treated her with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Word had spread about the incident, and Sarah found herself the reluctant center of attention. She was picking at a sandwich when David walked in, scanning the room with those alert blue eyes before they settled on her. He approached her table with the same quiet confidence he'd shown 3 nights ago. Mind if I sit? He asked. Please, Sarah gestured to the chair across from her. David settled into the seat, and Sarah noticed he positioned himself with his back to the wall and a clear view of the entrance. Old habits from his military days, she guessed. How are you doing? He asked. Better. The police called this morning. All 4 of them were charged. Turns out they had outstanding warrants in 3 states. Good. They won't be bothering anyone for a while. They sat quietly for a moment, the weight of unfinished conversation between them. Sarah studied David's face, noting the tired lines around his eyes and the way his fingers drummed silently against the table. Can I ask you something personal? She said. David nodded. You said you can't sleep most nights. Is that because of the Navy? What you did over there? David's jaw tightened slightly. Among other things. Sarah waited, sensing there was more if she gave him space to share it. I did 4 tours, David continued finally. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Lost a lot of good friends. Saw things that. He trailed off, then shook his head. The nightmares come and go. I'm sorry. Not your fault. David's smile was tired but genuine. Besides, it's not all bad. The training, the experience, it comes in handy sometimes. Like the other night. Is that what you do now? Help people? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. I wish it were that simple. Right now I work construction during the day, try to sleep at night, and come here when I can't. There was something in his voice that made Sarah lean forward. You sound like you're looking for something. Purpose, maybe. In the teams, everything had meaning. Every mission mattered. Now. He gestured vaguely. Now I frame houses and try to figure out what comes next. Sarah understood that feeling better than he knew. I had purpose too, before the accident. I was good at my job, good at life. Then, everything changed in 1 second. They looked at each other across the table, two people who'd had their worlds turned upside down in different ways but were struggling with similar questions about meaning and identity. What did you do? Before, David asked. Marketing director at Pinnacle Industries. I specialized in crisis management, helping companies rebuild their image after scandals or disasters. Sounds challenging. It was. I loved it. I was good at reading people, figuring out what they really wanted to hear versus what they said they wanted. Good at strategy. Sarah's voice grew wistful. I had a corner office, a company car, a 5-year plan. I was going to make VP by 30. What happened after the accident? Sarah's expression hardened. They said they wanted to keep me on, of course. Equal opportunity employer and all that. But, suddenly, there were budget cuts, restructuring, my position was eliminated. Amazing how quickly disability benefits started to look more attractive than keeping around a damaged employee. David's eyes flashed with anger. That's illegal. Proving it is another matter. They were careful, covered their tracks. By the time I could have fought it, I was dealing with medical bills, learning to live in a wheelchair, watching my boyfriend pack his bags. Sarah shrugged. Fighting a corporate legal team wasn't exactly priority 1. Your boyfriend left? 2 weeks after I got out of the hospital. Said he couldn't handle it, that this wasn't what he signed up for. The old hurt was still there, but duller now. Turned out he was right about one thing, it wasn't what he signed up for. But it wasn't what I signed up for either. David was quiet for a long moment. His loss, he said finally. The simple certainty in his voice caught Sarah off guard. She looked at him, trying to read the expression in those steady blue eyes. You don't know me, she said. I know enough. I know you've got courage, you fought back against those men even when you were terrified. I know you've got pride, you're here tonight instead of hiding at home. And, I know you've got strength, you survived something that would have broken a lot of people. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. When was the last time someone had seen strength in her instead of weakness? What about you, she asked. Ever been married? Engaged once. Another casualty of the job. David's smile was rueful. Hard to maintain a relationship when you're deployed 10 months out of the year and can't talk about what you do when you're gone. Do you miss it? The Navy? Every day. But, not the way you think. David paused, choosing his words carefully. I miss the brotherhood, the sense of mission. I miss knowing that what I was doing mattered, that I was making a difference. You made a difference the other night. One night. One incident. It's not enough. Sarah heard the frustration in his voice, the hunger for something more meaningful than building houses and fighting insomnia. An idea began forming in her mind, crazy and ambitious and probably impossible. What if it didn't have to be just one night, she said slowly. David looked at her questioningly. You said those men were predators. That you could tell by looking at them. Experience. You learn to read the signs. What if someone could use that experience? Your training, your ability to spot trouble before it happens? I'm not following. Sarah leaned forward, her mind racing with possibilities. There are people out there who need protection. People like me, vulnerable, isolated, targeted by predators who think they're easy marks. Private security? More than that. Personal protection for people who can't afford bodyguards but are still in danger. Women in domestic violence situations, elderly people being scammed, disabled individuals facing discrimination or worse. David was listening intently now. I know about crisis management, about reading people and situations. You know about personal protection, threat assessment, actual combat. Together. Sarah trailed off, realizing how presumptuous she sounded. Sorry, that's crazy. I don't even know why it's not crazy, David interrupted. Keep talking. Really? Really? You're onto something. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement, the first she'd experienced in months. There's a whole population of people who fall through the cracks. The system assumes they'll call 911 if there's trouble, but what about preventing trouble in the first place? What about teaching people to recognize threats, to protect themselves, to know when they need help? A consulting firm, David said slowly. Personal safety and security for at-risk individuals. Exactly. Not bodyguards for rich people, but real protection for real people who need it. David was quiet for several minutes, and Sarah could see him turning the idea over in his mind. Finally, he looked up at her. It would take capital to start something like that. Licensing, insurance, equipment. I have some savings left. Not much, but enough to get started small. And clients? How would we find people who need help? Sarah's excitement grew. Social services, domestic violence shelters, disability advocacy groups. There are organizations all over the city working with vulnerable populations. They know who needs help. We'd have to be careful about liability, about staying within legal boundaries. That's where my background comes in. I know how to navigate corporate structures, how to position services, how to manage risk. David studied her face. You're serious about this? Dead serious. For the first time since the accident, I feel like I might have found something worth doing again. It wouldn't be easy. Building a business from scratch, especially in this field. Nothing worth doing is easy. David smiled, and Sarah saw something she hadn't noticed before: hope. We'd need to research the market, develop service offerings, create business plans, she continued, ideas flowing faster now. But we could start small. Maybe with self-defense classes, threat awareness training. I could handle the tactical side, personal protection protocols, situational awareness, basic defensive techniques for people with limited mobility. And I could handle the business side, client relations, marketing, administrative functions. They looked at each other across the table, both sensing that something significant was happening. An hour ago, they'd been two lost souls trying to figure out what came next. Now they were talking about building something together, about finding purpose in each other's skills and experience. There's one problem, David said quietly. Sarah's heart sank. What? I'd be working with you every day. Getting to know you better, spending time together. He met her eyes directly. That could complicate things. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks again, but she didn't look away. It could, she agreed. Are you okay with that? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them had voiced yet. Sarah thought about the past 3 days, about how many times she'd replayed their conversation in her mind, about the way her pulse quickened when he'd walked into the bar tonight. I think I could handle it, she said softly. David's smile was different this time, warmer, more personal. Good. Because I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the next 2 hours sketching out ideas on napkins, talking through possibilities and challenges, building the framework for something that could give them both what they'd been missing. Purpose, partnership, and maybe something more. By the time they left the bar, they had the bones of a business plan and something that felt like the beginning of a real friendship. Or perhaps something deeper. Want to grab dinner tomorrow and keep working on this? David asked as he walked her to his truck. Yes, Sarah said without hesitation. As they drove through the city streets toward her apartment, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 long months: excitement about the future. For the first time since the accident, she could see past her limitations to possibilities she'd never considered before. David, she said as they pulled up to her building. Yeah. Thank you. Not just for the other night, but for tonight. For listening, for taking my idea seriously. Thank you for having the idea. And for trusting me enough to share it. He walked her to her door again, and this time when he said goodnight, Sarah found herself wishing he didn't have to leave. She watched from her window as his truck disappeared into the darkness, already counting the hours until she'd see him again. The business idea was good, she knew that with the same certainty that had once made her successful in the corporate world. But, as she settled into bed, Sarah realized that wasn't the only thing that had her excited about tomorrow. For the first time since the accident, she was looking forward to spending time with someone who saw her as more than a victim, someone who valued her mind as much as her courage. Someone who looked at her like she was whole, not broken. Someone who might just become much more than a business partner. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was that David Chen had rescued her twice now, once from 4 dangerous men, and once from the belief that her best days were behind her. Tomorrow, they would start building something together. Tonight, she would dream about possibilities she'd thought were lost forever. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez wheeled herself into the conference room of Guardian Personal Security Solutions, her own company, carrying a stack of client files and feeling more energized than she had in years. The office space wasn't much, 2 rooms above a coffee shop in a decent neighborhood, but it was theirs. Morning, partner, David called from his desk, where he was reviewing threat assessments for 3 new clients. Morning yourself, Sarah replied, settling behind her own desk. The morning routine had become comfortable, natural. They'd been working together every day for half a year now, and what had started as a desperate idea in a bar had grown into something real and important. Their client list had expanded from the initial handful of domestic violence survivors to include elderly victims of financial scams, disabled individuals facing harassment, and single parents dealing with stalkers. Word spread through social service networks about the team that actually understood what vulnerable people were facing. Mrs. Patterson called, David reported. The restraining order was served yesterday. Her ex-husband hasn't been seen near the house since. Sarah smiled as she made a note in the file. Mrs. Patterson was a 72-year-old widow whose own son had been stealing her Social Security checks and threatening her when she tried to stop him. Guardian had helped her navigate the legal system, secure her finances, and develop safety protocols for her home. Good. What about the Rodriguez case? Carmen starts the new job on Monday. Her supervisor knows about the situation and has agreed to alert security if her ex shows up at the building. Carmen Rodriguez was a young mother whose abusive boyfriend had been escalating his threats since she'd left him. David had spent weeks working with her on situational awareness and escape routes while Sarah coordinated with lawyers and victims advocates to build a comprehensive safety plan. And the college girl? Ashley? David's expression darkened slightly. Still getting harassing messages. I think we need to escalate that one. Ashley Chen, no relation to David, was a sophomore at the local university who'd been targeted by a group of fraternity boys after she'd reported one of them for assault. The harassment had started online but was getting increasingly personal and threatening. I agree. I'll call Detective Rodriguez this morning and see if we can get them to take it seriously. Sarah had maintained her contact with the police detective who'd handled her own case. Detective Rodriguez had become an unofficial liaison, helping Guardian navigate the sometimes complicated relationship between private security and law enforcement. The phone rang, and Sarah answered with their standard greeting, Guardian Personal Security, this is Sarah. Is this the company that helps people with stalkers? The voice on the other end was young, female, and frightened. We help people with a variety of personal safety concerns. What's your situation? My name is Emma Walsh. I think someone's been following me. Watching my house. Sarah grabbed a pen and notepad. Tell me what's been happening. For the next 20 minutes, she listened as Emma described 3 weeks of escalating surveillance. A man in a dark sedan parked outside her apartment. The same man showing up at her grocery store, her gym, her workplace. No direct contact, nothing obviously threatening, but the pattern was clear to someone trained to recognize it. Emma, this sounds like stalking behavior, and it needs to be taken seriously. Can you come in this afternoon? I'd like you to meet with my partner and me so we can develop a safety plan. You really think you can help? I know we can. Bring any photos or documentation you have, and we'll get started immediately. After scheduling the appointment, Sarah looked up to find David watching her with concern. New client? Stalker case. Classic patterned surveillance, no direct contact yet, but it's escalating. David nodded grimly. They always escalate. It was a lesson they'd learned repeatedly over the past 6 months. Predators didn't stop on their own. They had to be stopped. We should probably do a threat assessment before she comes in, Sarah continued. If this guy's been watching her for 3 weeks, he might follow her here. Already on it, David said, moving to the window. I'll check the street, see if anyone's watching our building. Sarah watched him scan the area with professional thoroughness. This had become second nature for both of them, always checking for threats, always thinking 2 steps ahead. It was exhausting sometimes, but it had also saved lives. Their success rate was impressive. In 6 months of operation, they'd helped 43 clients develop and implement personal safety plans. More importantly, they'd prevented escalation in 38 of those cases. The 5 cases where violence had occurred anyway had been minimized by the preparations Guardian had put in place. Streets clear, David reported, returning to his desk. But I'll keep an eye on things when she arrives. Sarah made another note in her calendar. Between Emma's appointment, 3 follow-up calls, and a training session with a new client, it would be a full day. How's the insurance paperwork coming? She asked. David groaned. Slowly. But the lawyer says we should have final approval next week. Professional liability insurance had been one of their biggest challenges. What they didn't fit neatly into existing categories. They weren't bodyguards, private investigators, or traditional security guards. They'd had to create their own professional classification and convince insurance companies to cover it. And the training facility? The gym owner agreed to let us use the space Sunday mornings for self-defense classes. First session is this weekend. Sarah felt a familiar surge of satisfaction. The self-defense classes had been her idea at group sessions for people with various physical limitations who needed to learn practical defensive techniques. David had been skeptical at first, doubting whether someone in a wheelchair could effectively teach physical combat skills. He'd changed his mind after watching her demonstrate techniques she'd learned from him, adapted for someone with limited mobility. Sarah couldn't throw a punch from a standing position, but she could deliver devastating strikes to vulnerable areas from her wheelchair. She couldn't run from an attacker, but she could use her chair as both shield and weapon. Mrs. Kim called yesterday, Sarah added. She wants to sign up her daughter for the next class. Mrs. Kim was a client whose elderly mother had been targeted by a romance scammer. They'd helped recover most of the stolen money and put systems in place to prevent future exploitation. Mrs. Kim's daughter had cerebral palsy and had been attacked twice in the past year by people who saw her disability as weakness. Good. We're up to 12 participants already. The success of their classes had surprised everyone, including Sarah and David. There was apparently a huge demand for practical self-defense training designed specifically for people with disabilities, older adults, and others who didn't fit the typical profile of martial arts students. Emma Walsh arrived that afternoon exactly on time, a small woman in her mid-20s with dark circles under her eyes and the hyper-vigilant posture Sarah had learned to recognize in trauma victims. She clutched a manila folder like a lifeline. Emma? Sarah smiled warmly. I'm Sarah Martinez, and this is my partner David Chen. Emma shook hands nervously, her eyes darting to the windows. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure if anyone would take this seriously. We take all threats seriously, David said in his calm, reassuring voice. Why don't you tell us what's been happening? For the next hour, Emma laid out her story in detail. The man had first appeared 3 weeks ago, parked outside her apartment building. Since then, she'd seen him at least a dozen times, always at a distance, always careful not to make direct contact, but definitely following her. I tried to get a picture, Emma said, opening her folder. But he's always too far away, and the quality isn't great. Sarah studied the blurry phone photos. The man appeared to be middle-aged, average height and build, nothing distinctive about his appearance except for the fact that he showed up everywhere Emma went. Have you filed a police report? David asked. Emma's face fell. I tried. They said without direct contact or explicit threats, there's nothing they can do. They told me to call back if he actually does something. Sarah and David exchanged a look. They'd heard this story too many times, law enforcement waiting for violence to occur before taking action instead of preventing it. That's where we come in, Sarah said. We don't wait for something to happen. We help you take control of the situation before it escalates. What does that mean? David leaned forward. First, we document everything. Every sighting, every location, every time you feel like you're being watched. We create a pattern profile that gives us a better picture of his behavior. Second, Sarah continued, we develop safety protocols for your daily routine. Changes to your patterns that make you harder to follow, ways to verify if you're being watched, emergency procedures if the situation escalates. Third, we work with you on situational awareness and basic defensive techniques. Not because we expect trouble, but because being prepared gives you confidence and control. Emma listened intently, taking notes. And this works? It works, David said firmly. We've handled dozens of cases like yours. The key is early intervention and comprehensive planning. They spent another hour walking Emma through their standard stalking protocol. Documentation procedures, route variations, communication trees with family and friends, emergency contacts, and basic personal safety techniques. I want you to start implementing these changes immediately, Sarah said as they wrapped up. And I want you to call us every day at the same time to check in. If anything escalates, if he makes contact or gets closer, you call us immediately. Day or night, David added. We're available 24/7 for active cases. Emma left looking more confident than when she'd arrived, armed with a comprehensive safety plan and the knowledge that someone was taking her seriously. What do you think? Sarah asked after Emma was gone. Classic escalation pattern. He'll make contact within the next week, maybe 2. David's expression was grim. The good news is she came to us early. We've got time to prepare. Should we alert Detective Rodriguez? Yeah. Even if they can't act yet, they should have it on record. As the day wound down, Sarah found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been a victim, isolated, dependent, defined by what she couldn't do. Now she spent her days helping other people take control of their lives, using skills and experience that had once seemed useless. Penny for your thoughts, David said, settling into the chair across from her desk. Just thinking about Emma. About all of them, really. Sarah gestured at the client files stacked around the office. 6 months ago, I thought my useful days were over. Now you're helping dozens of people stay safe. Making a real difference in their lives. We're making a difference, Sarah corrected. This only works because we're a team. David smiled, the warm expression that had become increasingly common as they'd grown closer. The best team I've ever been part of. There was something in his voice that made Sarah look up sharply. In 6 months of working together, they'd become close friends and perfect business partners, but they'd carefully avoided discussing anything more personal. Both of them carried too much baggage, had been hurt too badly to rush into anything. David, she said softly. I know. I know we agreed to keep things professional. He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly, looking uncertain. But, Sarah, these past 6 months, working with you, building this together, it's been the best time of my life since I left the Navy. Sarah felt her heart racing. She'd been having the same thoughts, feeling the same pull, but hadn't dared voice it. Mine too, she admitted. The best time since before the accident. I don't want to complicate what we've built here. The business is too important, and I can't risk David. Sarah reached across the desk to touch his hand. You're not risking anything. We're partners in this business because we work well together. If we became more than business partners, we'd still work well together. You think so? I know so. Because I trust you. Completely. With my safety, with my dreams, with my heart. David turned his hand to clasp hers. I've been falling for you since the night we met. I tried to fight it, tried to stay professional, but, Sarah, I can't anymore. Then, don't, she whispered. He leaned across the desk and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of 6 months of suppressed emotion. When they broke apart, Sarah saw everything she'd been hoping for in his eyes: love, respect, partnership, and the promise of a future she'd never dared imagine. So what happens now? She asked. Now we keep building this business, keep helping people, keep being the best team in personal security. David smiled. And we see where this goes, together. Together, Sarah agreed. As they locked up the office and headed out into the evening, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she'd been broken and hopeless, certain her best days were behind her. Now she was running a successful business with the man she loved, helping people stay safe and reclaim their lives. She'd gone from victim to protector, from helpless to empowered, from alone to partnered with someone who saw her strength instead of her disability. Emma Walsh called the next morning to report that her stalker had approached her directly for the first time, demanding to talk. She'd followed the safety protocols Guardian had taught her, documented the encounter, and called police with evidence that finally prompted them to act. Within 24 hours, the stalker was arrested on harassment charges. Emma was safe, and she credited Guardian with giving her the tools and confidence to handle a dangerous situation. It was exactly the kind of success that reminded Sarah why this work mattered. She and David weren't just running a business, they were proving every day that people who looked vulnerable or helpless could be anything but. They were living proof that strength came in many forms, and that the most powerful weapon against predators wasn't a gun or a knife, it was knowledge, preparation, and the refusal to be a victim. As Sarah hung up the phone and shared the good news with David, she smiled at the irony. People had thought she was helpless until they learned what she and her Navy SEAL partner were really capable of. They'd been wrong about her then, and they were wrong about her now. Sarah Martinez was many things: disabled, determined, intelligent, strong. But helpless? Never again.